I want to bring in our political contributor, Chris Uhlmann, who joins us live from Adelaide. We've heard the first reaction now from the Trump White House, from Marco Rubio, describing these sorts of moves, not just by the Australian government, by other European nations as well, as being meaningless and driven by domestic politics and will change nothing on the ground, he says.
Harsh but fair, wouldn't you say, Kieran? Utterly true that it's going to be meaningless in the long run because it changes nothing on the ground in the war between Israel and Gaza. And I would remind you, by the way, that when there were elections held there back in 2006 between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, Hamas won those elections. So if you're dealing with the Palestinian Authority, it's not necessarily representing the Palestinian people. And if you are going to have elections there, well, what happens when you have those elections? First of all, you've got to end the war and stop the killing. And that's clearly what the Albanese government wants to do. So it is well-intentioned on that, but it will have no effect on what happens there. And the problem that we've got in the state of Israel at the moment is that there are two combatants. That's the Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas, which both want a one-state solution. Neither of those sides is prepared to compromise with each other. And is it driven by domestic political purposes, for domestic political reasons here? Well, of course it is. And you will be well aware of the fact that for years, as we attended Labor Party conferences, the Labor Party has been on a path to recognising a Palestinian state. And each year there'd be sort of a rearguard action by the right, and they failed. And now I would say the vast bulk of the Labor Party's base, certainly the bulk of its caucus, is behind this move. In fact, the government will probably be pressed to be even harder on Israel in the future.
Chris, it's a good point, and we're going to hear from the Prime Minister in about 20 minutes from now, but he's been talking about this for well over 30 years, this issue, for the various reasons that you just articulated, and one would argue it would come comfortably to him, given his personal beliefs on the matter.
Yeah, Kieran, and look, I can see that the bind that the Australian government is in. When we see those images coming out of Gaza, they are horrific. Now, I have been a lifelong supporter of the State of Israel and believe that it has the right to robustly defend itself. But it cannot be a blank cheque. And there are members of the Israeli Defence Force who are urging Benjamin Netanyahu not to occupy Gaza because of the consequences of that. We have seen a massive move by former prime ministers and members of the intelligence community inside of the State of Israel, writing to the American president saying that they believe that Israel is now losing the war. It is certainly losing the war of public opinion around the Western world, and this was precisely the outcome that Hamas wanted. Hamas knew when it attacked Israel that it could never win a fight. What it hoped for was that Israel would disenfranchise itself with the rest of the world, and you've got to say it's been remarkably successful. And Hamas did not care if every single person in Gaza died, if the State of Israel is essentially loses its standing in the world, then it's won.
Indeed, and you just wonder, where does it end? And I guess that's part of the military advice being received by the Army Chief within the IDF and others to say, where would it end in terms of the strategic threat already being removed? According to the signatories of that letter that you referred to, they argued that the strategic threat of that terrorist group is gone, to get rid of every last individual that, as you rightly point out, cynically, appallingly, they hide themselves among the civilian population, the terrorists. So you just think, how do you get all of them? It's almost, it's tragic to even contemplate what you'd have to do to get rid of them all.
Kieran, there is no answer to this problem. With each war that we have, you just have another generation that is radicalised. You could kill every single member of Hamas, but something else will rise to take its place. And now we see members of the cabinet of Benjamin Netanyahu essentially wanting to move on the West Bank. They do not want a state of Palestine inside the borders of what they see as a state of Israel. So they are irreconcilable. You cannot find a position where these two will meet. And it seems to me that what's happening inside the State of Israel is the government there is becoming increasingly aggressive, knowing that this is its moment. It intends to wipe the floor with all of its enemies. And it's been remarkably successful with Israel and with Iran and some of the others. But more will arise.
Yes. And not without its not without its many positives along those lines. If you're a Christian in Lebanon, I don't think you're mourning the fact that Hezbollah has been decimated, Chris. So it's not like there haven't been positives associated with this offensive from Israel. But I want to ask you now about where you are. You're at the American-Australia Leadership Dialogue in Adelaide. How does the dialogue unfold in a world of Donald Trump?
Yeah, and look, this is a really interesting question. It hasn't started yet, and I guess I'll find out over the next couple of days. But we've seen with what we've seen from Marco Rubio and the fact that the Prime Minister has essentially been chasing the President around the world, trying to get to have a meeting with him, that things are not good in the state of relationship between Australia and the United States. And look, that's not down entirely or even mostly to Anthony Albanese. I think a lot of his critics have got to recognise the fact that Donald Trump has made this extremely difficult. When he whacks Australia with tariffs, given the fact that we have the positive trading relationship that we have with the United States, so when essentially he seems to be discarding alliances or not at least caring for them. So Donald Trump has a big role in the fact that that meeting hasn't taken place, but there's not a shadow of a doubt that Australia rests underneath the security blanket of the United States. And even though we try to make these statements that we are independent, essentially we're getting more and more US troops here. We are binding ourselves ever closer to the US as we're seeking to distance ourselves from the US president and cozy up to China. That is not an equation which can hold in the long run.
Fair point, Chris. We will talk to you next week and hear your analysis on how all that's gone. And obviously we'll have the Trump-Putin summit to digest as well over coming days. Thank you, Chris. We'll catch you soon.